This is the magicwordpodcast.com.
Hello, this is Scott Wells for the magicwordpodcast.com. This week we are going to be talking with Professor Richard Wiseman. I started to say Dr. Richard Wiseman, but Richard is the person who is in charge of the YouTube channel called Quirkology. Perhaps you may have seen that because it's had over 800 million views, and so you may have been one who has viewed that more than once as well. He has several hundred videos that are out over there. If you've not seen that, you need to go over and check out YouTube and see his Quirkology videos, or you can go to themagicwordpodcast.com this week, and we'll have a link to a video that you can watch there that's amazing. Aside from that, Professor Wiseman is someone who has been studying psychology for a long time. He's been also very interested in seances. He's been a magician since he was at an early age. We talk a little bit about that in some of his starts and stops, I guess, at magic. He's been performing at the Fringe Festival for a long time. In fact, he has plans right now to be at the next Fringe Festival there in Edinburgh coming up later. Well, as we recorded this, it was in June, and the Fringe Festival is coming up then in August. So by the time that this is aired, you should have a chance, if you are in or anywhere near the Edinburgh area during the month of August. I guess there are like 3,000 shows a day that are going on over there, and about 60 different magicians. Anyhow, we get into all that and talk about that, as well as seances that he had done with Andy Nyman, who is a known name to you also, who has worked with Darren Brown, as well as Richard, who has worked with him as well. And if you have read the recent book about David Copperfield's museum that has the beautiful pictures by Homer Lewag, it was actually authored by Richard Wiseman. So it it's a great narration of what's in the museum. Anyhow, a fascinating gentleman, someone who, if you perhaps have attended Magic Live, you may have seen him at one of the Magic Live conferences. He did a seance there, and he also did an experimental thing with the group one year. Anyhow, if you haven't seen or know anything about him, you're going to learn so much, and you're going to want to know more about him. And you can learn some things then also by following his podcast, On My Mind with Richard Wiseman. Highly recommend that. It's a nice little short enough podcast with some sound bites, really interesting and entertaining and educational. I think that you would enjoy. I pretty much told you kind of an overview of and summarize what we have talked about here today, but that's what you're going to be hearing in much more detail with my guest here this week. So please welcome my guest. I want you first of all to get a cup of Earl Grey tea and join us then for tea time with Professor Wiseman. So please welcome my guest this week, Professor Richard Wiseman, here on The Magic Word. I've got with me today someone who is a noted psychologist and has gotten his undergraduate degree from the University College in London, and then went on to the University of Edinburgh, where he got his PhD then in psychology. It was interesting. He's been a magician for such a long time. Back, I guess, even was working at Covent Garden. I was listening to his podcast about that, and he said he wasn't that good, which is why he decided to go to college, I guess. But we'll discuss that. It's very, when you're at Covent Garden, if you don't get an audience, I mean, people are going to move on. Anyhow, so he is someone perhaps you have seen, you have heard. I have admired him from a distance for so many years on so many different levels. If you have been to Magic Live, he has been a presenter for a couple of years. And one particular year, he did a really cool seance in which he had people go over to another room, and the rest of us were watching on the big screen. And another time, we were all going into a room, kind of had a few different groups that came in, and we were pushing buttons and answering these questions. And it was a lot of fun. If you had not attended Magic Live, perhaps you might be one of the people who have viewed over 800 million times one of his Quirkology videos that's on YouTube. Perhaps you have read one of his books, as I'm a huge fan of one in particular called Paranormality, in which he has done a lot of research about seeing things that are not there. And he's done some work with seances with Andy Nyman, and I had Andy on before. You might go back and listen to a podcast on that. So if you're ready to get going, I suggest that you go get yourself some Earl Grey and have tea time with Richard Wiseman. Here he is, Dr. Richard Wiseman. Hi there, Professor.
Hello, pleasure to be here, and greetings from Edinburgh, a slightly cloudy Edinburgh. It's sunny this morning, which means that it's declared a national holiday in Scotland if the sun comes out.
It's not Greek, right?
And indeed, and we should be clear when you're being almost too kind when you said the Covent Garden thing was not so great. It was a disaster. We were awful. We were beyond awful. I went down there the other day. They're still booing us, even though it was about 40 years ago. That is how bad it was. So,
well, there has to be a baseline.
That's right.
There has to be a baseline, right?
Yes, and Covent Garden is very much my baseline. Yes, anything is better than that. Even one person, it just smiling on the off chance, is better than the response we got from Covent Garden. So, yes, that was many years ago, but thank goodness moved on and upwards, which it has to be statistically. So, yeah.
Now, you are currently a professor of psychology and at the University of Hertfordshire, and I am a big fan. Terry Seabrook has been a longtime friend, and I went to visit him in Hertz. And I know he was a big fan then also of the football club there in town. And somewhere around here, I've still got a scarf that says Hertz on it. And so I followed that for a while. As I recall, I think Elton John owned or still owns the team. Is that right? Or did you know that? Or
I think that could be right. Yeah, I'm not a football expert, which is a way of saying I know absolutely nothing
well,
about
you and I
it.
are on the same level, my friend. So
And many magicians. I mean, sport doesn't really feature on the radar of magic very much in my experience. But no, Hertfordshire has always been very kind to me, supported all the kind of weird and wonderful projects that I've been involved in. And you really need that as an academic. Lots of universities just wouldn't want somebody looking at paranormal stuff or magic-y stuff or anything like that. So no, it's been a wonderful 30 years now I've been at the university.
You touched on something there that's interesting. That not a lot of magicians necessarily are interested in sports, and perhaps it's because that a lot of magicians were not athletes, and that's why they went into magic because they could not be on the team, and so they decided I can kind of fool people and make friends this way, and so that's kind of a commonality I can see because I've talked to so many people. It's like the last thing we would ever talk about at a magic convention or in a session or something would be sports. If you bring it up, most people just kind of glaze over. It's just not something that discuss.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I suppose there's all sorts of things going on there. I mean, magic is certainly a wonderful way of getting attention in a social environment because you've got your little trick, you know what's going to happen, and you sort of your pattern and so on. Also, it tends not to involve team playing very, very much. It is a solitary thing you rehearse, and then normally it's one-on-one or one on a small group.
Good point.
So yeah, magicians are not team players particularly, and they're not when it comes to creating theatre. Having worked on a few plays and putting magic into plays, you realize that a play really is a team effort. You've got a lighting designer, a sound person, and actors and directors and choreographers, where magicians are one man and one person bands. And sometimes that's good because it means they're very agile and can change things around just before they walk on stage. And other times it's not so good because they're not getting that diversity of input. So it's a double-edged sword, I think.
And another thing I think I see as a common thread, and again, Terry Seabrook and I used to talk about this for hours, and that is Sherlock Holmes. And I think that's because of the deductive reasoning that Sherlock Holmes has, that he likes the psychology of, and I think magicians enjoy this as well.
I think they do. I mean, of course, created by Arthur Conan Doyle, who is a huge believer in the paranormal. That was the irony. I mean, massive spiritualist. And a believer in fairies as well. He defended the existence of fairies. And I think part of what was going on there, I mean, if you look at what Sherlock Holmes is doing, it is actually impossible. As we all know, you can't glance at somebody's body language and know what card they're thinking of. That is a kind of fantasy. So in a sense, I think it fits in with Arthur Conan Doyle's kind of fantasy world rather than what's actually going on in the real world in terms of body language, which is normally you can't tell anything at all from the way someone's standing or walking or whatever. But it is a curious one.
That's an interesting thread right there then too, Richard, because I have read some books. It was Joe Notaro, I think, had written a book about what the body says. He was an FBI profiler, I believe, or something, and talking about the importance of whether that, you're mirroring somebody and how to, this kind of a thing. Do you give much credibility to body language?
I mean, some of it's kind of obvious, I guess, in some ways, but Not very much. It's an unreliable source because it's a fairly controllable one.
Mm.
Whether I move my hands around or cross my arms, it's something I can control. So most of my work into that sort of thing has been into lying and has looked far more at the words people use and how they use them. And of course, magicians can kid themselves about this, that they actually do have some insight into body language. But, I would say if you've got no idea what the card is, or ask someone to think of a card, you genuinely got no idea what it is, try and figure it out from their body language and see how far you get. I'd look forward to hearing the results of that experiment.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I was just thinking about there was one particular thing I believe that was the Nixon and Kennedy debate back in the early 60s, in which that Nixon was just blinking many times, and everybody felt like he was unreliable and perhaps wasn't telling the truth,
Well, blinking is really interesting. I've actually done some work on magic and blinking, because blinking is a visual reset. So when we're looking at a visual scene, it's a vast amount of information coming in. And blinking is literally downtime when the brain is kind of resetting. And so if you watch an audience watching a film, they tend to blink at the same time because they're predicting when there won't be anything interesting happening on screen. Maybe it'll be a cut or something like that. And the same happens with magic. We looked at people watching Teller perform his amazing Miser's Dream routine, which ends with the goldfish. And on each of the steals, it tended to coincide with members of the audience blinking, because they're done on the offbeat. They're done on a laugh or people are seeing an effect and another part of the routine and so on. And so, yeah, blinking is kind of an interesting one from a magic point of view. But again, it's not going to be 100%. And as we know, for magic, it needs to be bomb-proof. You need to be able to stand in front of a group of strangers, and this trick works every time. That's why magicians are better psychologists than psychologists. When I do an experiment, I'm lucky if it works on 50, 60% of my participants. With a magic trick, it has to work on everyone pretty much under all circumstances.
That's right.
So it is phenomenal psychologically what magicians do.
On the flip side of that, you're talking about the audiences blinking. When I have seen magicians blink, it's like, oh, that's when he did the move.
Yeah, and there's a bit of kidding yourself about that. And there's been some research into that. Yes, I think it's better not to blink at all as a performer and just stare relentlessly at your audience. It doesn't come across as at all creepy.
Yeah, make them very uncomfortable.
Very uncomfortable. Yeah, even more uncomfortable if such a thing were possible. Yes.
Exactly. Oh, one of the things, as far as one of your for your CV, I was going to say at the beginning over here, of course, that you are the host of On My Mind podcast, which I guess you got about 100 and some podcasts on that. That's a delightful podcast, and it is one of the leading podcasts in the world. It's only about 20 minutes or 25 or so, so it's a nice chunk of time.
Thank you. Yes, there were lots of fun to do. With Marnie Chesterton was my co-host, and
he has such a lovely voice.
Lovely, lovely person. And the strange thing was, even though there's a nice kind of chemistry there, we don't know each other at all. So we meet for the episode, we do the episode, and we go our separate ways. So it was lovely to just sort of have that kind of special time. But it's not like I've known her for years or anything. It just sort of feels very comfortable. So yeah, thank you for your kind words there.
Yeah, no, you have fooled me there, because it seemed like you guys probably get together for coffee every morning. It's kind of what it felt like, just two friends talking.
Yeah, people say that, but no, absolutely not. No idea. No idea who she is. Complete mystery.
That's interesting. Going back over to the book on paranormality, I think is amazing book. And again, I have read it several times. And there was one particular thing I wanted to talk with you a little bit about, and that was on a ghost I guess, an apparition of what you had created, and going to a bar in a dockside someplace and saying, okay, well, did this Captain Jack actually die here? And did he get his eye poked out and got a peg leg or whatever? And then the story grew, I guess, basically from that. Can you give a quicker summary than that?
Yeah, it's actually not my work. So that was, it's in the book, but it's somebody else's experiment, I think carried out at the end of the 70s. And it was a great idea, which was to look at the way in which ghost stories change over time and affect testimony. And of course, magicians know this as well. That if you do a trick for somebody, really socially, there's two things going on. There's their experience of that, but then what you're giving them is some social currency. You're giving them an experience to tell other people about. And if they go to the other person and went, oh, it's amazing, the magician put somebody in a box, saw them in half, and the other person goes, well, was there two people in the box? Well, next time they tell that story, they're going to say there was just one person in that box. We saw inside the box, and then the magician sawed the person in half. In other words, they will do the work for you. They will create an impossible story because that's what they're trying to convey. And that's what was happening with the ghost work in the 70s. Somebody went to the Docklands, which is an area in London, created this idea, sort of spread the word, as it were, about a ghost there. And then the witnesses did the work for them. They started to tell other people about the ghost. The legend grew. Other people claimed to have seen the ghost, experienced it, and so on. So it speaks to this idea about how unreliable testimony is, which magicians kind of know. My favorite thing about that is when you do a trick for somebody and there's this very strange social phenomena that they then say, "Oh, come and show my friends." Yeah. It's a very strange thing that they want to say, "Show my friends." And the worst one is they go, "Oh, just show," in front of their friends. They'll say, "Oh, do that one where the card ends up in the wallet." So even if you achieve it, there's no surprise. And now it's harder to achieve because they know what the end point is. So that's very annoying. But it is phenomenal that people do our work for us in terms of magic.
Well, that's true. And then most times you cannot recreate what they said. He did this and that, and it ended up over here, and it was an impossible situation. More than it's like, yeah, that's right. But I do something different now. That's
right. That's right. Hold on to this one sponge ball and let's see how we go. Yes, that's right.
Exactly.
The vanish of the elephant.
The reason I wanted to bring that up is because that some years ago, a business partner of mine, Jamie Salinas, and I used to do seances on a regular basis. And there was, boy, should I make the story short? But basically, there was someone who was wanting us to do a seance in their store or in this place. Anyhow, so we created a story. We went on to the store's Facebook page, and we were talking about this. I'd forgotten what we could. The Weeping Willow Widow is what we called her. Okay. We said that to understand in this area where this store was, basically back a long time ago, there was a lady who had a fiance, and she stood him up, and she ended up hanging herself on this willow tree and died. And that was basically the story. And has anyone heard this story before? And we put it out on Facebook. And before long, someone said, "Yeah, I think I heard of such and such." And then before long, there was a thread of people making up the story for us, which we then used in the seance, which was completely just fabricated.
It's amazing. And part of that is, of course, the lure of the seance. This idea of being in darkness with luminous tabs on objects. I started out, as you said in the intro there, with Andy Nyman many, many years ago, doing those sorts of seances, the Eugene Berger seance. And it was so much fun. And so unlike a magic show. In a magic show, you want to do as much as possible. Where in a seance, you really want to tread that line of uncertainty. And if you produce something incredible, people go, "Oh, this is a magic show." And now they're in a different frame of mind. They need to be in this frame of mind of, I don't know quite what I'm looking at here. Maybe it is genuine, or maybe it's trickery, or maybe it's an optical illusion. And that sense of uncertainty around the seance context, I think, makes it really, really interesting. So yeah, big fan of seances. And then, as you said, and the problem with them is that you're always performing to 15, 20 people maximum. So at Magic Live, we made it into a huge Powers of Darkness routine where we took 10 people, put them into a dark room, and the other 500 saw an infrared feed so they could see the trickery, as it were, that was going on in the darkness. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. And quite an ambitious thing to do, actually. It's the first time we'd done it at Magic Live, so it was terrifying.
I like the setup on that because the people that you were sitting in the room saying, "Well, we're going to rotate people," as I recall, correct me if I'm wrong. So this way the people felt like, well, nobody's going to be watching us. I mean, you didn't say, "We're going to put you in here and you're going to be on TV. We're going to, I think, put you in here and then we'll have another group then later or whatever." And then after they went and sit down, what they don't know is that we're going to be watching them, right?
There was a lot of that. And also when they came back out, they could give us the first-hand testimony of what happened in the darkness, and we'd seen the reality of it. And we had lots of earpieces. So the medium was not on an earpiece, so I could find out information about people in the group from the big audience and feed it to the medium and so on. So it was a lot of fun to do. And I told Stan I'd done it before, just so that he'd definitely book it and go ahead with it.
But and of
course I hadn't. Of course I hadn't. I think he may have known, actually. Yeah, it was like all good projects, terrifying. You got to take risks. And we took a big one there, and it kind of paid off.
It did. But did you learn from that and then do it again, or was that a one and done?
No, we then did it at Blackpool. So we did it there, but it's a big old thing to do, and you can only really do it for magicians because of the exposure involved with the methods. So yeah, we did it there, and again went down very well. So it was lots of fun, and it was built on probably, I don't know, 120 seances that I've done for smaller kind of groups. So it was great to then take it to magicians and make it this big. It's what Magic Live's great, taking an event and just suddenly giving it a twist and making it this really large event or really special in a particular way.
Well, you had obviously planned that quite thoroughly, but there was the other thing that I referred to, in which, as I recall, didn't we have laser pointers or something we were using?
Yes, that was experimental. So
yeah,
because I'm based in Edinburgh, I do a lot of work at the Edinburgh Fringe. In fact, I've got a show coming up in August.
I want to talk about that shortly too.
Yeah, thank you. What I always do with any sort of creativity project is go, what is everyone else doing? Can I do the opposite? So that's always my mantra for I sort of do any kind of creativity stuff. And so when I looked at the Edinburgh Fringe, I thought every show has a presenter. It has a comedian or a magician or actors. Can we do a show without anyone on stage? And that's a really weird and exciting idea. And so we had this idea of about 100 people coming in. They would sit down, they'd have an envelope which would have some materials inside, and they would just read slides and watch video, and they would be taken through a show. So there was psychology stuff in there, optical illusions, and magic. We had one of the early Woody Aragon Tear It Up, Count It in there. And so we did that, and it worked. And again, that was a huge risk. I really remember the very first performance when people came in, and there's 100 of them. And it's one thing to create this stuff in your living room and in your head. It's another when you see the people sitting there and thinking, I hope this is going to work because I've never done this before. And so we start the show. Music was essential because otherwise the room felt dead. So there was a big music track behind it, and it worked. People had fun for 40 minutes. And part of that was I did come out at the very beginning and I said to people, this is your show. And if you want to make it a silly show or to kill the show or to ruin it, you can do that. And they took responsibility and actually did everything they could to make the show work. And the very opening of it, which I think we then used at Magic Live when we did a shortened version of it, was one of my favorite moments, which was we had 2 buttons on stage, big buttons that you could press, like a yellow one and a blue one. And it just came up on the screen. One of these buttons starts the show. One of them ends the show. Somebody press a button. And the audience would sit there and look at each other and nudge each other. And eventually someone would come up onto the stage and get a cheer. They'd hit a button. And whichever button they'd hit, the whole show would just end. It would just go, ooh. And it would just sit there until somebody shouted out, press the other button. And they hit the other button, and then suddenly we go into the show with all the music and so on. But I love that as beginning because it had that kind of sense of uncertainty. And then we took a shortened version of that over to Magic Live, and Stan sorted out all the logistics. It was, lots of fun to do. I think we did it 8 times at Magic Live.
That's kind of a woman or tiger door thing, right?
What's that?
I say it's kind of the woman or the tiger that the story, which door that you're going to open. It's either a woman or it's a tiger behind the door.
Okay.
It's an old short story, an O. Henry story, I think.
Okay.
Anyhow, that was really great. And so you say you're going to be taking that to the Fringe Festival.
No, the new show is called The Invention of Magic. And this is about the magic of Paul Curry. And the reason for this was I went around all these Fringe shows with a friend last year, Fringe magic shows. It's about 60 of them. And my friend said to me, hold on a minute, we're seeing the same tricks. And I went, yeah. And they went, so these magicians, they're not creating these tricks, are they? And I said, no, you buy them or read about them.
Right.
And she went, well, comedians, you'd never get away with that with comedy. No. They don't stand up and do somebody else's material.
Right.
And I suddenly realized that audiences knew nothing about the invention of magic. So this is saying to an audience, magic is invented normally by a different group of people to the performers. And we're going to investigate that through Paul Curry. And we look at how magic evolves and changes. And so I perform a 1936 card trick and then say how Paul Curry looked at that and improved it in 1937 and do an improved version of it. And it's about trying to stop them thinking, how's that done? and replacing it with, oh, that's really interesting. And getting into the culture of magic, stuff that we love, but audiences just don't know anything about. And I performed it in December at the Magic Festival here, and it went down pretty well. People liked it. So I'm going to be back in the final week of the festival towards the end of August doing it.
And I take it that you have been to the festival and performed there before? Yeah,
Many,
on
many times.
several occasions. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I was on the board of it. Helped to run it
Oh, were you?
for eight
Okay.
years. Yeah, yes, yeah.
Because I understand that's quite a daunting thing because there are so many different venues. I've heard even in the car, people will do a play in their front seat of the car or something. I mean, they're looking for any and every place, regardless of how large or small it is.
Yeah, it's very, very hard to get your head around the size of it. It's the largest arts festival in the world. I think any one day will have about 3,000 performances.
3,000 performances. Oh
Yes.
my gosh, in a day.
Yes. It's real. So every space in the city becomes a performance space.
hmm
And it's incredible. So I'd always urge people to come. I think there's about 60 magic shows this year. And so you have to be able to stand out from the crowd one way or another. But the invention of magic is a small show. It's a quiet show. And I'm just sort of, I'd like, also it doesn't feel like an egotistical thing because you're talking about another person's genius and about this thing you love, which again makes it very, very different to a kind of look at me show, which is how most magicians do their shows. The other curious thing, I was looking at the blurb. You have to write a couple of lines about the show for the program, which is sitting next to me. I'd written mine in the first person. I'd said, this is about my love of magic. And most of the blurbs, in fact, all of the others, are written in third person. It's come along and see John Smith do an incredible show. And I like the kind of personal aspect of a first person, non-egotistical, quiet thing, which is just saying to people, the culture of magic is fascinating. I'm going to tell you a bit more about it. And it's not a challenge scenario. So when I did it in December at the Magic Fest, I was doing Paul Curry's Hats and Magician's trick. It's a great, great trick, but it does involve counting. And I miscounted. So I looked down and I said to the audience, I'm sorry, this occasionally happens. I have messed this up genuinely. And someone in the audience said, oh, don't worry, just reset it and show us it again. And that was because there was no challenge in the room. You know, I wasn't saying, look at me doing all my clever stuff. It was like talking about this other person's genius. I'm just showing you some interest. And so it feels different. I'm very interested in different frames, different ways of presenting magic.
Wow. I like that. That's interesting about how that, different ways of framing that. What it reminds me that Paul Daniels did one on Max Malini some years ago.
That's correct. Great show. Yeah, really good. And did some great Malini material. So I think those sorts of shows, which are just, you know, magic is fascinating. You know, we write everything down. We've got a literature that goes back, 200 years. You can ask Alexander with whatever it is, 3 million pages of information on it. And audiences don't know any of this stuff. And I think to give them a little peek behind the curtain is good for magic. And it gets over this idea, my friend's comment of, hold on a minute, you guys didn't invent this stuff. You're all doing the same material.
Right.
And just being honest about that, I think is an interesting thing to do.
In Branson, Missouri, there are several magicians who work, and I say several, maybe about 7 or 8 different magicians. And if you go to each show, you're going to see at least one thing or two, like linking rings, for an example, or a cube zag, or whatever it is. It's like if you are an audience member, a general public who is a non-magician, you're going to say, wait a minute, I think I saw that at this other show. There is a lot of commonality among magicians, although the presentations obviously are completely different. One person could do a comedy linking rings and someone do something serious or different classical music or whatever it is, but it's still basically the effect to the audience is the same.
Yeah, and also taking credit for that, as if they invented the linking rings. And you think, no, you didn't. Somebody else did that. You may have a little twist on it or whatever, but it isn't yours. And just being honest about that, it's a difficult thing for magicians to do. But comedians wouldn't do it. You'd never go out and all tell the same funny story. And if it's a play where that is happening, it wasn't written by the people on stage. It's a play and you can buy that play and so on. So it's just being a little bit more honest and trying to take the puzzle element. I always say the worst magic shows are 45 minutes of puzzles you can't solve, a 20-minute break, and another 45 minutes of puzzles you can't solve. That's a
Frustrating.
bad show.
No, good.
And no wonder people end up not liking magicians. So it's trying to take the element out and going, I'm showing you this stuff, but for another reason. It's because I'm telling you about the history of magic or how magic evolves or whatever. And playing with those frames, I think, is essential for the future of magic. We have to get away from this kind of challenge aspect, puzzly aspect, in my opinion.
Well, there again, you touched on something in which would be like the magician in trouble syndrome that most magicians, including myself, will say, oh, it's a great trick. And we all have those kinds of things in there in which the audience might be in on it, or you're fooling someone, or else you bring them along and then you say, fooled you, at the end. So it makes them kind of look a little bit foolish for not understanding the puzzle. What are your thoughts on those kinds of magician in trouble tricks?
Stop doing it. Stop doing it. Nobody likes it. Nobody likes to be fooled. If you're going to, I think you have to be authentic and honest. And all of those sucker type tricks aren't honest. They just look at me, oh, look, you thought I'd messed up. I haven't. And you think, well, great, but how's that about an audience member? It should be all about them and the experience they're having. It shouldn't be about you. The method is just a way of producing that experience. We don't put on a VR headset and go, my goodness, what an amazing bit of code. We talk about the experience. I'm sure some people do. I'm sure if you're a coder, you do. But the point is that it's a magical experience for the person, and that's what it should be for the audience. Not kind of, oh, well done, you managed to fool me, you managed to trick me. And I think that small shift of just thinking about effects and the impact on the audience will get you a very, very long way.
In other words, treat your audience as if they are sentient beings and intelligent.
Treat your audience as if they're the only thing that matters. And it's your job to give them a good time or an interesting time or a time they'll talk about with their friends. It isn't about you. That would be my number one mantra, because that's what we should be doing as performers. David Berglas passed on a few years ago, but I spent many a happy evening with David. And at one point, we're going through scrapbooks, and there was a picture of him, I think as a 7 or 8 year old, doing a play or something on stage. And I said, is this your first performance? And he said, oh, no, I wasn't performing. I was showing off. I said, what's the difference? He said, showing off is all about yourself. Performing is all about the audience. And it's absolutely key, I think.
Love it.
That we shouldn't be showing off. We should be thinking, how do we give these people a wonderful time? That's what they're paying for. That's what they want. A magical experience. What does that even mean? It's going to be about them, making them feel good, feel special, feel interested, whatever it is, whatever the emotion is. Start with that. Not start with, wouldn't it be great if they just, I managed to fool them and show that I'm smarter than them, using somebody else's tricks I didn't invent.
Or you just want to show them this box that makes something disappear. Isn't this cool? Well,
that's right.
Focuses on the effect and not on the audience.
But who cares? Who cares that you can do that? Nobody, I suspect. When I did do close-up magic, which was many years ago, table hopping, I was very interested in effects that could happen in my absence. So I actually used to finish with showing people like a 2 of spades, and I used to do this particularly with kids. And so I like this card because there's lots of blank space. And I put it face down on the table. Then I get the kid to pretend to pick up a red crayon and draw a circle, another colored crayon, some dots, another colored crayon, and do a half circle. And I go, oh, you did that really well. It's fantastic. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed yourself at the restaurant, and I'll see you later. Walk away.
Wow. Okay.
When they turned over the card, in crayon was a smiley face on the card. But they found that in my absence. And the reaction was so much stronger because I could hear it. It was their private moment that they go, oh my goodness, look here. And I wasn't there at that point. It wasn't about me. And it was so much stronger for it. And I'm just interested in exploring these different ways of doing the thing I love, which is magic. But it has to change and evolve, I think.
In the original lecture notes of Pre-Thoughts by Banachek, when we put this out, and I say the first one, it had his whole act, start to finish. And at the ending of it, it was explaining what he would finish this last trick, and an audience member was on stage holding a piece of paper towards themselves or whatever. And he would say, "Okay, I've done this, this, and this," kind of reminding everybody what they did, and then I finished with this drawing duplication or whatever it is. And so you know that this person is holding them right now. Thank you very much and good night. And he walks off, and this person is still standing there, like looking around. It's like, and then everybody said, "What is it?" And they finally turn around, you know, and they get applause and everything.
Right.
And he'd been doing that for a long number of years. And apparently Max Maven had that in his routine too, because Max contacted us and he said, "That's actually my routine and you shouldn't be publishing that." And so we took it out. And so it never appeared again, but, you know, even though that it was independently thought of, but it was just a great routine though.
It's the same thought. You know, it's an unusual piece of theatre. I can see that coming from Max as well, actually.
Mm-hmm.
It's an unusual thing to do, but it takes, yeah, I think it's a Tommy Wonder idea, isn't it? That when the effect happens, you shouldn't look at people. You should look away from them because
Mm-hmm.
it amplifies their reaction. It's a private moment. You wouldn't stare at somebody when you want them to respond in a certain
Good
way.
point.
And it's just an amplification of that, of not being present. Because it shouldn't be about you. It's about giving that audience, in my example, it was about just giving that kid a moment of turning the card over. And it's their experience. And that's my job, is to give them an interesting experience, not for them to think, oh, isn't Wiseman amazing? And once you think about things like that, that's what sits behind the seance stuff as well. It's just interesting and experimental where there's no performer, and the Paul Curry show that we're going to be doing. So yeah, I think that's the little theme there.
Well, kind of circling back to a few other things that we've kind of touched on, that is Andy Nyman and seances and theater. Have you been consulting and work with Andy? I know that Andy's done several things then with Darren Brown. And have you done some things with Darren as well for his show? And
Yeah, not so much the live stuff, but two of the TV shows. The very first special I was on, Darren's very first special, he came to the university to film it. And we bonded very, very quickly because we both had a very similar sense of humor. And we were supposed to do this interview about twins,
Mhm.
and we could not get through it because we kept giggling like schoolboys.
Uh-huh.
And in the end, I think Andrew O'Connor got maybe slightly annoyed with us and told us to get on with it, and we did. And then, yeah, he's become a very good friend since then. I've appeared in some of the other TV stuff, and he did a TV show about luck, which is based on my Luck Factor book. And then Andy, I was at a close-up convention, Mark Leverage close-up convention a million years ago. And boy, I was doing my close-up act. It was awful. It was bad. It was almost as bad as my street work. And I was doing top-it work, and Michael Lamar was there. And I was missing the top-it. Things were coming out the top-it that I hadn't put in the top-it. It was awful. And again, I found it very funny. I looked up and there was Andy killing himself laughing. I didn't know him at that point.
Uh-huh.
And so afterwards he came over and said, oh, I really enjoyed that. And he gave me a lift back to London. We chatted. And that's where we found out we got this love of seances. I'd seen Eugene Berger come over to give a close-up lecture. At the end of that lecture, he said, I've got one copy of Spirit Theatre. And I went and bought it. Changed my life. I read that book and love it so much. And Andy had read it as well. And we got together and did that. So some of Andy's ghost stories play is based around my stuff. So that play, if you haven't seen it, as the sort of main character is Professor Goodman, which is a play on Wiseman, and some of the ghost stuff in there is based on my ghost stuff. So yeah, we've all been swimming in the same pond. As
I was going to ask you about ghost stories because I understand that was that written then by Andy, and you had consulted because he did that turned into a movie then as well.
That's correct. That's correct. So it's written by Andy and Jeremy Dyson, as a very famous writer over here. They put together, and it uses some of my material from the ghost work that I've done and a story that actually happened to me, which I won't spoil for people, when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about a ghost lecture and so on. So yeah, a little bit consulting for both that and the film.
And talking about seances as well, that one of the things I was thinking about, and I wanted to circle back then too, is when people come to seances, they come with preconceived notions. Either they believe in it or they don't. And they're not going to change their mind. They either come as a skeptic or they come as a believer, and they want to ask you questions afterwards. How do you try to do you try to convince people, or you just present it the way you normally do and try to make it entertaining, or do you try to make it more believable, to make people question?
Yeah, well, I thought long and hard about that framing, and it comes back to honesty. So we frame it as a theatrical reconstruction of a Victorian seance. We're trying to give you the experience of what it would have been like 100 and something years ago to go to a darkroom seance.
Mhm.
And I say to the group, I will play the role of the medium. You will play the role of the sitters. If you want to be skeptical, be skeptical. If you want to believe, believe. But I will promise you just one thing, which is an interesting evening. And that's my only promise.
Mhm.
And then we do the show, blah, 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 things happen. And at the end of it, I say, I made a promise, which was to give you an interesting evening. And I hope I've kept my promise. And that's that. So you don't want to start off by saying what you're about to see is a magic show. And for me, you definitely don't want to say you're going to see something genuine. So we always frame it as a reconstruction to give you the experience of what it would be like to take part in one of these wonderful events over 100 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's quite carefully discussed at the end. So and in fact, I probably did it at Magic Live as well. I will say things like, I don't know what you thought of that, but imagine 100 and something years ago, what it'd been like to have seen that before telephones, before technology and so on. Get yourself into that mindset. And we're just completely sidestepping is it genuine or not? Because to me, that's the least interesting question, given what we're doing.
So that helps avoid people coming to you afterwards and queuing up to say, am I going to win the lottery, or will I get this job, or when am I getting married, or kind of a thing, right?
Absolutely. And I've never had anything like that. People just come and have an enjoyable time. And again, it just feels like we're giving them something. We're giving them an interesting experience they can tell their friends about. And the group will talk about methods, often. So the way our seance is configured, there's nothing to find afterwards. There's no threads, there's no magnets, there's the objects, which is a ball and a slate and so on. They're all ungimmicked. So I walk out of the room. I say, thanks, blah, 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 walk out. The audience can look under the table. They can do whatever they want. There's nothing to find. And interesting conversations will flow from that. But that's their conversation. It's not one I'm involved in. Otherwise, I'm going to have to be honest and tell them exactly what's going on.
You don't want to do that.
No.
So as busy as you are with so many other different projects, how often do you do seances, or is it a certain time of the year? Do you believe that people are more susceptible or looking for seances in October around Halloween, or throughout the rest of the year, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't done them for a while. So we did loads of them, different science festivals and different arts festivals. And for experiments, I published papers on them, did them at Magic Live. But it's something that sits in the cupboard that we'll get out and do again. But at the minute, I'm so busy, have a new kind of book out on kids' magic and so on. So just sort of rushing around doing stuff. So, but the seance, it always holds a special part in my heart because it's such fun. And those methods that the Victorian fake spiritualists pioneered, they work. They work today. And when you think of the technological advances, that we carry around smartphones that can do things that just would seem impossible to Victorians, still, the methods of the seances from all those years ago frighten and fool people nowadays, which is a phenomenal thought.
Yeah, whether you're using threads or whatever else. I mean, there are all kinds of electronic methods, of course, that are available and for sale to the bizarre community, if you will. But when we've done seances, I often find that just an old-fashioned string and a pulley it's just
simple stuff that works. Electronics scare me. I'm just so scared of the batteries going or whatever it is. So no, we use simple things that are written up in books, from 1890, something like that. It's always the simple stuff. It's what Eugene preaches in the Spirit Theatre book.
Have you ever been involved with a Houdini seance?
No, I've been involved in lots of, quote, genuine seances with genuine mediums. I mean, I sat in a lot of those, and they're dreadful. They're really bad. Because they're not dealing with people who are looking at the frame of this of being a trick. They're dealing with believers, so you don't need to do anything that's very impressive. But I've sat in a lot of those, never been convinced by any of it. I've gone to many haunted houses, never seen a ghost, and so on. So I'm pretty skeptical about the paranormally stuff, but still find it fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It is so much fun. I have. Again, been doing them for a long time then as well. But as far as the Houdini seance, they had the official seance that was on Halloween in Fort Worth, Texas, many years ago, and I was tapped to be the medium. So I
Mm.
came out on stage and talked a little bit about Houdini. We had John Cox, who had shown some things, and we had somebody who did a straitjacket, who did different kinds of things for this group. And then because the public had been invited then as well for this particular seance, and then we went down to a table where there were just the 13 of us that were around. Sid Radner's uh, um, descendant, I've forgotten his grandson or somebody, and other people who would kind of tie back to Houdini. We had different artifacts on the table. And so I was the one I was doing all the talking and trying to get Houdini to come back. But it was a fun evening,
That's
official
great.
kind of a thing.
Did he turn up?
Well, it was a weird thing that kind of happened. It's just one of those things, coincidences happen in which
Oh.
that, you say things and then you stop. And there was a program of the evening's activities that everyone had, and that was sitting on the table. And at some point, whenever I had asked for some manifestation of some sort to happen, the program opened up. It popped open. I mean, I didn't open to a page. It just kind of, it had been sitting there for clearly 15 minutes or so. And then it just kind of like it sprung open a little bit, kind of is the best way of saying it. It was just
Mm.
kind of interesting and coincidental during the time that we were talking that something, it could have been the humidity in the room that finally it hit it. I mean, there are all kinds of scientific ways of trying to go back and explain it, but it was a coincidence.
But it's an uncanny, creepy one. I mean, had
Yes.
that book just completely folded over, you'd have gone, "Oh, someone's setting me up. This is a thread or whatever."
Right.
It's the small things. It's the small things that make you go, "Ooh." I remember we did a séance actually here in Edinburgh, probably about 10 years ago, and I'm doing the initial kind of blur thing on it. It's quiet in the room. It's only about 10 people. I'm just talking to them in total darkness, and I'm hearing a scratching sound off to the side. It's a definite scratching sound. And my fear was that someone had broken away from the circle and was messing around.
Uh-huh.
So I asked everyone to hold hands. Then we go around the group. We say our names into the darkness. And I'm counting around. So I know everyone's around that circle. I'm definitely hearing it. And then I realize it's a rat.
Oh, my.
So we're in this kind of underground cavern bit. And I've never been so scared in my life because I'm sort of I'm thinking this audience are thinking maybe we're doing that. I know what it actually is, and now I am afraid.
Now you're
But
really scared.
yeah, but it's a small thing, tiny thing again. That just kind of oh, that's a bit creepy. So yes, it's the small stuff, the small stuff.
Yeah, well, that's a very good point. That sometimes I think magicians want to overplay their hand and think, well, something needs
Yes,
to fall over, or that wooden stick or something, that whatever. But yeah, I think it's the small things that people will say, "Did you hear that?" or "Did you see that?"
yeah,
Because not everybody may experience the same
exactly,
thing. Which is why
exactly.
at the beginning of our seance, we may say there will be certain things that some people hear, but others don't, or some things that some people will see out of the corner of your eyes and the other people won't. But I want you to be completely aware of all your senses, all five of your senses, using them to make a sixth sense. So that's a way that you can almost feel something that's going to be happening, basically, because each of you will experience this in a different way. And I'm saying that because I know that some people believe and some people don't, but it's trying to make everybody to have their senses heightened. And once that they do, then they're going to be more open if whenever they do hear something, or like let's say we're doing psychoconnect touches and you tap somebody, they're sensitive to the fact that yes, he touched me 3 times on my shoulder or something.
Yes, yeah, yeah. And too much in it becomes a trick, and they're into trick solving.
Exactly.
But less than that, and it becomes much more fun for them to discuss. So yeah, interesting.
So that's something right now that you just kind of put on the shelf for a while and you're going to come back to at a later time. But
Yeah, I'm sure it will come back to haunt
yep,
us,
yep.
as it were.
So to
But
speak.
yeah, so right now I'm
Heard a
concentrating
phrase.
on the Paul Curry thing, and I've got this new kids book out, which is Magic Your Mind Happy, which is kind of teaching kids magic, but actually really teaching essential life skills.
Mhm.
So I looked at tricks that would teach confidence or creativity or curiosity. So it's a kind of fun way of doing a new kids book
Yeah, I
on
want to
magic.
talk about that here. So tell me some
Sure.
more about the book. What's the title of the book again?
It's Magic Your Mind Happy.
Yep.
And I went in to pitch to the kids publisher, Hachette in this country, very big kids publisher. And I said, look, let's do a magic book and let's do one that's never been done before, which is that we can use magic as a vehicle to teach all the amazing skills that we know magic gives you, that we take for granted.
Right.
A part of it is the community. Isn't it amazing that you can go anywhere in the world pretty much and instantly meet up with a group of people and that they will
Like-minded
stick with
people.
you? Yes.
Mhm.
And we take that for granted.
Mm.
And it's incredible. It's incredible. I mean, all of my friends I've known since I was probably 19, 20. years old, and they're all met through magic. We take it for granted about having a little bit of confidence because we know we can break the ice at a party or something with a little trick or pick something up and so on. So the social skills, the confidence, the curiosity that magicians have, the fact we know a bit of chemistry, a bit of physics, a bit of maths when we do the magic square, we take it for granted. And all these things, I thought magic is a wonderful vehicle so that the book is written to teach kids those life skills, which I think are very important skills, through the medium of magic. So they learn tricks. And then I say, try variations on this. This is what somebody I teach the jumping elastic band, 2 fingers to the other 2 fingers. And say that was invented in 1911. 40 years later, somebody has the idea of putting a twisted band across the tops of the fingers. What can you do with it? We're not finished with this yet. There's something still to be developed. So it's about growth and development and about resilience. I mean, my goodness, magicians are ready for failure. They know what to do when things go wrong. They've got outs, they've got precautions. And that's a good lesson in life. And so it's about all those things. It's about using magic as this kind of springboard for life skills. And I've been going around book festivals talking about it. It's been lots of fun, actually.
And it's for what age group?
About 9 to adult, it turns out. So it's illustrated, and it was fun to put together. And I should say David Britland was a consultant on it. Will Houston was a consultant. So sort of really lovely to work with very knowledgeable people. But yeah, nine upwards. And when I've been doing these book festivals, it's just been a joy because instead of just saying, oh, magic's about method, you can get to talk about the complexity of magic and what would have happened if you'd have chosen this other card. And actually, I've got an out here that you never saw. Or, how even just getting someone to take a card, we forget how much we've learned in how to do that. Hold on to one of these, not take a card, because take a card, now they're going to get a bit suspicious. But you hold on to one of these, you turn your head away slightly as you spread the cards. Now it looks like you couldn't possibly be doing a classic force. All those little bits. So yeah, I've been going around talking about that stuff and hopefully getting people, into magic at a young age in the right direction.
And again, the title is Magic the Mind.
Magic Your Mind Happy.
Magic Your Mind. So you're using magic as a verb, basically. Magic Your Mind
Correct.
Happy. Yeah. Okay.
Correct. That's right. Yes. Indeed. Yeah.
That's why it's hard to remember. Magic Your Mind Happy.
Yes, that's right. That's right. It's not an easy one, but so it's been fun. It's been fun.
And so, are you? Is this available internationally? I assume on Amazon.
Yeah,
I
think. Yeah, I think so. And it came out of all the work that I was doing, looking at magic being used outside of the entertainment context. So I'd worked with College of Magic in South Africa, who are using it with marginalized communities to build confidence. Magic Care in the Netherlands, who are doing magic in hospitals, and a lot of that happens in the States as well. Breathe in this country, in the UK, who we got kids with movement difficulties, and then teaching them tricks, get them to repeat movements, but in a meaningful kind of way. Rich McDougall, a very good friend of mine, involved in all of that. And so I was doing this work, and I put together an academic book about all of that work, all the scientific research that's showing that it's extremely effective, so that practitioners would have a single book they could go to. So that's a kind of semi-academic book. And then out of that came the Magic Your Mind Happy, which was a fun book for kids, basically, with the same lessons in. So it's been, a couple of years in the making.
And your first children's book.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think my 12th commercial book, but first children's book.
Right. Well, as we start to wrap up, I would be remiss if I don't talk about Quirkology and a little bit about some of the video. I say some of the videos. How many videos actually have you put out there?
There's not, for Quirkology, not that many. I think there's like maybe 25, something like that. It's not a huge number.
But it's a huge number of views. Oh my goodness. 800 million?
It's astonishing. And it happened from day one. We did color changing card trick on day one, and YouTube hadn't been around. It had been around about a year and a bit. And so we had a downtime with the group. We filmed color changing card trick. We uploaded it, and I won't say what that video is about because it'll spoil it for people, but if they want to go watch it, it's out there. Woke up in the morning, and it was 250,000 views.
Oh, my.
And I thought, my goodness, it's incredible. And at that point, I was used to magic being on television, which meant you made a pitch to a commissioning editor and maybe you'd get a show or something. But this meant that YouTube meant I could do just 5 minutes, and it was my own thing. I was in charge of it. So we started producing these illusions where you see something incredible, then you realize the ridiculous method that we're using.
Mm-hmm.
And people kind of loved it. And it's still being used today. You know, teachers use them a lot in classroom for creativity, showing the first part, and people are trying to guess how it's done and so on.
Or counting the number of times they catch the basketball or whatever.
And all that stuff. Yeah, the basketball video, it was actually Dan Simon's, a friend of mine. But yeah, well, that same kind of area. And then I think we put out one video, which was bets you'd always win. 10 bets you would always win, which again is the stuff we learned when we were like 7 or 8 years old, you know, all that those old books.
Yeah.
It's so old, it's new. You know, that whole thing of, I don't know, whatever it is, you put the banknote under the bottle, can you take away the banknote without removing the bottle? All those things that we all learned. But you forget, again, most people don't know that stuff. And so he's putting those out, and they just racked up, 40 million views one of those videos has got.
Wow.
And they're all just filmed in my lounge. We never spent more than $30 on any video at all. They're all low tech, and they all speak to the power of magic. I think that people just love what we do.
Well, we do. I certainly do. I like watching them over and over again. It's like, how did that get me? Just a minute, even with an explanation, I still like to see, okay, well, oh, now I see that, So yeah. It makes such great sense. And are you still coming out with some of those things and got some ideas, or?
Yeah, well, if I get an idea, then I'll do it. The last one was actually during the pandemic, which was a little box where we produced 2 ping pong balls from. And I love the method. We were going to expose the method. It's a little brown box. You open it up and it's empty. Then you produce a table tennis ball, shut it, and again, another table tennis ball. It looks impossible. And I watched the video and I thought, I cannot bring myself to expose that. I love it. I love it so much. So we just put out the effect on that one. And of course, in all those years we've been doing it, I don't know what it's been now, 15 years, we've never had a single complaint from a magician, because the methods are all so ridiculous. You couldn't possibly use them live on stage and so on. But what they do is celebrate the genius of magic. It's magic thinking, but in a completely different way. And as you say, once you realize what the method is, you go back and think, oh, that's why they did it in exactly that way, and so on. Right. And most of them took 2-3 days to film, even though maybe you end up with maybe 60 seconds of footage, because we just do it again and again. A lot of them are probabilistic, that a ball has to land in exactly the right moment, exactly the right time. So I'm surrounded by endless outtakes of us getting it wrong, basically. But no, it was a joy. It was a joy, and lovely that people still enjoy them.
Do people send you ideas also, saying, hey, here's, or maybe some of their own videos? Has this spawned a generation of others doing the similar thing? Or?
No, it hasn't. What it has spawned is a generation of people that grew up on them. So sometimes when I go to a student group, those people will be in their early 20s, and they go, oh my goodness, it's the Quirkology man. I used to watch you when I was 8 years old. You're the reason I got into psychology, which is both delightful and horrific at the same time.
Making you feel old.
Yes, absolutely. In my head, I'm still 25.
Exactly. Well, that is, again, a wonderful series. And the reason you call it Quirkology, because it was kind of quirky and psychology. It was kind of the fusion.
All these things are chance. Freakonomics, which was a huge book, came out.
I love their podcast. Yeah,
it's great. It's great. And I gave a talk somewhere. Somebody asked about Freakonomics, and I said, "Well, I'm not an economist. I'm a psychologist, but I do quirky psychology. So if I was going to do it, it would be called quirky psychology. No, actually, it'd be called Quirkology." And then I left that talk. It was a talk in America, actually. I went to the airport. I opened a paperback novel I got, because there was a blank bit of paper at the back, and I wrote down the contents of a Quirkology book, a book on quirky psychology. And word for word, that became the contents of the actual Quirkology book that came out. And then the YouTube channel was off the back of that. So we love to think our lives are governed by our big thoughts and our big decisions. It's rubbish. It's chance. It's luck. And most of the things I've done, it's just because I've been lucky and fortunate and thought, oh, hold on a second, there's another way of doing this. Let's all have some fun.
And that was one of the title of your early book. What was that? The Luck Factor?
Luck Factor was the first one, and Quirkology was the second book.
So Quirkology was on the back of the Luck Factor, basically.
Yeah, that's right. And then I had this idea. I went out for for coffee with a friend of mine, CEO, and she said, "You understand about happiness. Can you explain how to be happy?" So I started to explain about the psychology of happiness. She looked at her watch and she said, "Can you get on with it?" And I said, "How long have you got?" She said, "I'm busy, about a minute." So I tried to explain what she could do to be happier in a minute and could do something. And then I went away again and I thought, there's quite a lot of psychology you could deliver in a minute. And that became the basis, that thought, that coffee became the basis for 59 seconds, which became the biggest book for me, which are things you can learn in less than a minute. So again, we'd love to think, oh yeah, you have these big brainstorming ideas, you come up with these genius thoughts. It's rubbish. I went out for coffee by chance. This thing happened.
Fate or whatever you want to call it.
Whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, just the right place, the right time.
Yeah, and recognizing an opportunity and doing what magicians do best, which is being agile enough to change and to follow that opportunity. We do it when we put an act together, where people just change around instantly and change the order of things. We do it in performances where we see an opportunity and we go for it. It's a very flexible way of looking at the world.
When you're looking at your audience and you're going with what they enjoy, not necessarily what's on your cue sheet.
Yeah. Well, we all know the best lines come to you at that moment when when you're staring at people and you've got to come up with something funny and for whatever reason the gods smile on you and you do, and that's the line that stays in for the next decade. So and again, that flexibility we take for granted, but it's not built into many activities. So again, it's another. We give to magic, but my goodness, do we get a lot from the cultural community of magic.
Wow. Well, this has been, I can't believe how quickly this has flown by, and we can talk for a lot longer then as well. But I want to end with, as I always do, by asking what it is that's your magic word, what's your phrase, or what's your philosophy of life. There were so many different things that you had mentioned through there, but what's important that keeps you going every day?
Probably what I find amazing about the world, and particularly about magic, is that you take the cups and balls, ambitious tricks that have been around for a very long time, that many people have looked at, and still there's stuff to be discovered. Still, I go to a convention and there'll be a person doing it in a new way with a new move, a new presentation. And it's so easy to think, oh my goodness, there's nothing new to be. And absolutely, there's new stuff out there. There's innovative ways of doing things that haven't been discovered yet. And that future hasn't happened. It's up to us to create it. And we're just the custodians of magic. The previous generation passed it on to us, and it's our job to make it as good as possible for the next generation. And if we do that, we'll have done something worthwhile. So I think that's my philosophy.
It's kind of like Vernon says, don't stop thinking.
Yeah, don't stop trying to improve magic, because we've got a job to do, which is to pass it on to the next generation.
That's true. Very true. Well, for people who are interested in buying your book, we talked about Amazon.com. Is there a website people can go to, or someplace you would recommend people?
There is. I've got a website, richardwiseman.com is out there, and I'm on Twitter as @RichardWiseman. But yeah, and I'm very pro live stuff. So I try and do as much of it as possible. If I'm giving a talk or a convention or something, please come along and say hello. It's always a delight. And thank you for inviting me on your wonderful podcast. Congratulations on the fantastic work you do.
Thank you very much. I enjoy doing it because of you, people like you that help make my day and just make this a delight to share time together. So I've really enjoyed it then as well. So I appreciate it. So for the Magic Word Podcast, that was Richard, Professor. So how do you go by? Do you go by Professor or do you go by Doctor?
Cool. Richard. Just call me Richard.
There he was. That was Richard Wiseman. Scotty out. Thank you, Richard. That was just a delightful conversation, and it was so much fun. And I'm sorry for the rest of you that you didn't get to hear the rest of the conversation. After we finished, we talked for at least another hour after that, just about so many different things over there. He's just such a delightful guy, and so fun and interesting to talk to. Just if you have an opportunity to see him at some convention, please stop him and say hello and say you heard him here on this podcast. And as I said, I mentioned earlier that you should listen to his podcast, and that is On My Mind with Richard Wiseman. Also, during this podcast, he talked about his new book, Magic Your Mind Happy. And so that he is agreed to offer a couple of these as prizes to listeners. So if you go to themagicwordpodcast.com for the next couple of weeks, depending upon when you hear this, this contest may or may not be running, but we're going to be running this for the next couple of weeks from the time that this is first posted. And if you have a chance, you can then, again, go to the website and just put in your name and email address. And if your name is randomly selected from wherever you are in the world, he will be glad to personalize a copy to you with his signature to you, and he'll send that out to you if you happen to be one of the people who is randomly selected. So be sure to go to themagicwordpodcast.com, where you get a lot more information there anyhow, and you can sign up for that form. Anyhow, it's been a delight to talk with Richard on this podcast, and I again encourage you to go out and listen to his podcast, go and check out his videos on Quirkology, listen to what he has to say, read the books that he's got out. Just very fascinating guy. And if you have a chance to see him some at convention or somewhere, he said he'll be at Blackpool next year, so we'll see him there. I know there will be about another 3,500 other magicians, so most people who go there probably see him from time to time anyhow. But if you've not, be sure to go and check him out then at that place. So until next week, stay well, get booked, and remember to keep on trying to improve your magic, because we have an obligation to pass this on to the next generation. This is Scotty out.